Nature of Society, Part 3, Session 10R. There is now sufficient discontent and sufficient desire for reform to accomplish the things we have been discussing. Attention is, however, very distracted, and efforts divided by schemes of a myriad of reforms, most of which are inadequate. Reforms and improvements may sound laudable, but if these are not fundamental, there will be no revolutionary improvement. The working class attempts to improve their condition by combining in trade unions to demand higher wages from their employers. This usually achieves very little and does nothing to affect the general condition, which forces men into bitter competition with each other for the opportunity to gain a living. Man is primarily an individual, a separate entity, differing from his fellow working men in desires and powers, and requiring to use these powers for the satisfaction of these desires. Man is also a social being and has some common desires with his fellow men, and he requires that he work in concert with them to fulfill these desires. So, there is need for individual and social action. Increasingly, we find that when civilization advances, social conditions become relatively more important, and more there is the demand for greater social action. This is not readily recognized, as evil unquestionably results from leaving to the individual action that should be taken by society, and conversely, action taken by society that could be more effectively done by individuals. Society should not leave activities such as water or electricity supply solely to individual enterprise, or if they do, have a supervisory role in this. Governments should not be engaged in private enterprise. All schemes for securing equality in conditions of men by placing the distribution of wealth in the hands of government have the fatal effect of beginning at the wrong end. It assumes perfect government, but it is not that government makes society, but society makes government. Until we have the situation where wealth is equally distributed, we cannot expect pure government. It is not necessary to have government to assume total command of the heights of the economy. It is only necessary that the equal rights of all to the primary means of production be established. This is the source of all other means of production, and so far from involving the government in this primary means of production, should bring about its withdrawal from this activity. If equal rights to all are established, this would purify government in two ways. Firstly, by bettering social conditions, upon which honest government depends, and secondly, by enormously simplifying government administration. There is no real conflict between labor and capital, but the true conflict is between labor and monopoly of land. This monopoly, as we said before, forces competition among workmen for employment. Abolish this monopoly of land, which bars men employing themselves, and capital will be made available to labor. The capitalist then could not obtain labor for less than the laborer could get by employing himself. If this condition prevails, then the sharp distinction between capital and labor will now cease to be. Where there exists a class denied all rights to the element necessary to life and labor, competition is one-sided, and as population increases, must press the lowest class into virtual slavery and starvation. But where the natural rights of all are secured, then competition, acting on every land, between employers as being employed, between buyers as being sellers, can injure no one. Protection of free trade. The state should intervene where free competition becomes impossible, Such a condition is wholly ignored by the extreme socialists and the extreme capitalists alike. Such a condition, as we have said before, is where a monopoly situation occurs, as in the provision of roads, water, electricity, etc. Outside of this condition, the free trade principle should be carried to its logical conclusion. The free trade principle is the principle of free production, which requires the removal of all protective tariffs and all restrictions upon production. Let us end our term's work by again finally referring to Henry George, who is the supreme authority on the protection of free trade issue. What he says here aptly sums up our term's work. But he who follows the principle of free trade to its logical conclusion can strike at the very root of protection, can answer every question and meet every objection, appeal to the surest of instincts and the strongest of motives. He will see in free trade not a mere fiscal reform, but a movement which has for its aim and end nothing less than the abolition of poverty and of the vice and crime and degradation that follow from it, by the resolution to the disinherited of their natural rights and the establishment of society upon the basis of justice. He will catch the inspiration of a great cause, enough to live for and to die for, and be moved by an enthusiasm that he can evoke in another. For it is true, as was declared by the First National Assembly of France, that ignorance, neglect, or contempt of human rights are the sole causes of public misfortunes and the corruption of governments. Here is the conclusion of the whole matter, that we should do unto others as we would have them do to us, that we should respect the rights of others as scrupulously as we would have our rights respected, is not a mere counsel of perfection to individuals, but it is the law to which we must conform social institutions and national policy if we would secure the blessings of abundance and peace, protection, or free trade. We now come to the end of another term of the nature of society. There will be no second half. Next term, we will be looking at how a site value tax regime could be practically and pragmatically adopted in any country, and how such activities as banking, health services, education, housing, labor, physical development and environmental conservation, law and order, and tax administration would fare under such a regime. We hope you have enjoyed this term's work, and we look forward to your attendance next term. Have a great vacation.